Good morning, everyone, and a happy Friday to you all. I'm Errol Barnett, in for our friend and neighbor, Vladimir Duthier. We're looking at major stories happening all across the U.S. and around the world at this moment. Coming up, U.S. and Russian officials speak in Moscow after a week of deadly attacks in Ukraine. But will they be able to strike a deal to bring an end to the fighting? Plus, facing a judge, the man accused in that brazen murder of the United Healthcare CEO faces arraignment today, just hours after prosecutors filed the official papers seeking the death penalty. And world leaders make the pilgrimage to Rome to pay their final respects to Pope Francis. In just a matter of hours, the Vatican will take the next steps for the papal funeral. You're in the right place. This is CBS News 24/7. All right, let's start with the war in Ukraine and what could be a pivotal few days. Right now, the White House Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, he's in Moscow and he's meeting, as you see right here, with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Both President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky will be in Rome this weekend, but it's unclear if they will speak directly. Now, these talks are happening after a new apparent attack in Russia. You're seeing this footage. Authorities say a car bomb killed a senior military leader this morning, and an investigation is underway into the circumstances. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams has been following all of this for us from London. Holly, good morning to you. We know that it's still early in this breaking development, but what do we know about this explosion?
Good morning, Errol. Well, Russian officials say that Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik was killed by an explosive device rigged with shrapnel and placed inside a car just outside of Moscow this morning. Moskalik was a senior figure in the general staff of Russia's military. Russian media is reporting that the device was detonated remotely as he walked past, though we cannot confirm that detail at this point. You may remember, Errol, that another Russian general was killed by a bomb hidden inside an electric scooter in Moscow back in December. And Ukrainian security sources later confirmed that Ukraine was behind that assassination.
And Holly, we saw some footage of White House envoy Steve Witkoff meeting with President Putin in Russia today. What at this point are we hearing from both sides about their conversations?
Well, Errol, this is Steve Witkoff's fourth visit to Russia this year. We don't know what came out of that meeting with Vladimir Putin today, if anything. But there is a lot of reporting about the terms of a possible ceasefire deal being proposed by the US, which is thought to include, or reportedly includes, excluding Ukraine from NATO membership and all the protection that that would bring, lifting some economic sanctions imposed on Russia because of Vladimir Putin's invasion, freezing the fighting close to the current front line. And remember that Russia currently occupies around 20% of Ukrainian territory, and recognizing Crimea as part of Russia. Now, as you know, Russia seized Crimea by force back in 2014, the first time that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Critics of that proposed ceasefire, or at least the terms that have been reported, say that it is highly favorable to Russia. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said this week that formally recognizing Crimea as part of Russia would be against his country's constitution. So that in particular seems to be a red line for the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are also worried that a ceasefire deal without adequate security guarantees, particularly from the United States, could leave the door open to Russia invading their country again in the future. Remember, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine back in 2014 and then reneged on agreements to invade again in 2022. Russia, perhaps unsurprisingly, is sounding much more positive. In an interview yesterday with Face the Nation's Margaret Brennan, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Russia is, quote, ready to reach a deal, though he said that the terms still need to be fine-tuned. Errol.
Yeah, Holly, and we'll speak more about later this hour why the Constitution constrains what Zelensky can do, and we'll see some of that interview with Lavrov and our own Margaret Brennan. Holly Williams in London, thank you so much. Now, meantime, President Trump says he's spoken with Chinese President Xi Jinping, quote, numerous times on tariffs, but he was vague about if he's spoken with him since the trade war broke out. Beijing has denied any negotiations are currently underway and have called for abolishing unilateral tariffs. Now, the uncertainty has put the U.S. stock market on a roller coaster these past few weeks. You're looking at a live look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average right now. It was in green for most of the week, but as you see, this this morning, it is in the red, pulling back about 170 points. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady is at the New York Stock Exchange for us this morning. Kelly, great to see you. How is Wall Street digesting the changing headlines on tariffs between China and the U.S.?
Minute by minute, Errol, just like
Really?
the rest of us. You mentioned the Dow. I've actually got a big board over here that I can kind of see all the indexes. At the NYSE, each of them are down about 0.5% to 1%. Not that much. I think right now you're kind of seeing investors digest the back and forth. President Trump saying that there have been negotiations and calls with China, China coming out and saying that there haven't been. Of course, we also heard from the president yesterday, or rather Besant yesterday, that there may be a deal with South Korea next week. So what I would say is right now Wall Street is digesting things minute by minute. I spoke to a few traders this morning to take their temperature, and they said the same thing. On a Friday at the New York Stock Exchange, things can change very quickly, especially since we have some consumer sentiment data coming out.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Kelly, China seems to be digging in week by week. Overnight, it canceled some U.S. shipments of pork. Last week, we saw the cancellation of Boeing aircraft from the U.S. Help us understand, if you can, what's behind this recent move surrounding pork and how that could impact farmers in the U.S.
So this is more retaliation. We have seen the actual tariffs reach such a high percentage. Remember, the United States has a 145% tariff on China. China has a 125% tariff on the U.S. It is not sustainable where it is right now, but to keep moving that higher and higher. So you are seeing China take other steps to retaliate. This most recent shipment of canceling, I believe it was 12,000 metric tons of pork. That is the highest cancellation that we have seen from China since back in COVID, when there were all those supply chain disruptions. In terms of what it means for U.S. farmers, it's not good. China is the third largest market for the U.S., and so it is very important for these farmers to continue to have access to these markets. But remember, the last time around during the first Trump administration, this technique, this retaliation, really hurt the American agriculture and farming industry to the point where the government did need to step in and give them subsidies. So we haven't reached that point yet, but another escalation from Beijing, Errol.
Yeah, we'll keep watching all this closely. Kelly O'Grady on the trading floor, just on a balcony above. Thanks so much. For more on Trump's trade war with China, let's cross over now to White House reporter Willie James Inman. Willie, good morning to you. So fact check everything for us. President Trump says he has been speaking with Xi. China says we are not currently speaking directly. So where do negotiations stand today?
Hey there, Errol. Good to be with you on this Friday morning. Well, the president, as you mentioned, said that he is, in fact, communicating with the Chinese in terms of that trade standoff that both nations really just haven't budged quite yet. We've seen those tariffs, as Kelly and you were talking about, go up to 145% on the U.S. side, 125% on the Chinese side. But the president talked about this a little bit ago before he left for Rome. Take a listen to what he said.
I think the tariff plan is doing very well. We're resetting the table. We're going to make our country very rich, very, very rich. It's already happening.
And the president wouldn't elaborate in further detail as to when or if he spoke with President Xi of China. Remember, the Chinese say that negotiations aren't happening. They are essentially saying that those leader-level conversations aren't happening, but the White House maintains that they're moving forward with those negotiations. On top of that, we have talks with other nations, including South Korea. Kelly mentioned South Korea as well. We just got a statement from the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and it essentially said that those technical conversations will play out next week with South Korea, so we could potentially see some movement there. On top of that, you have another Asian nation, Vietnam, that is moving closer to negotiations. Well, I should say negotiations are ongoing, but closer to working out a deal with the United States. So it's not just China, but of course, hundreds of other nations that the White House has to work out a deal with, because President Trump has announced those reciprocal tariffs basically on all U.S. trading partners. He was talking about that yesterday with Norway, although in the case of Norway, Errol, the president says that they have a trade surplus with the United States, so perhaps no hard feelings there with the nation of Norway.
Yeah, and the president also said of that surplus, we need to get some of that. So it kind of is curious considering what that really means. I want to ask you, Willie, about immigration, because a federal judge ordered the Trump administration now to return a second migrant deported to El Salvador. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's right. This is the case of a 20-year-old Venezuelan man who was living in Maryland, who had a pending asylum application. Now, a federal district judge saying this essentially violates a settlement agreement that allows for migrants who have a pending asylum application to not be deported. So this federal judge ordering the Trump administration to facilitate this man's return. We, of course, know that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was sent to El Salvador, was wrongly sent to El Salvador. The administration admitted that that was a mistake. But we haven't seen any movement there in terms of the Trump administration looking to get Abrego Garcia from El Salvador back to the United States. The Trump administration maintains that he is a violent criminal. His family and his lawyers say otherwise, that that is not the case. We did, of course, see Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland visit with Abrego Garcia and speak with him. And the argument that Van Hollen has been saying is that Abrego Garcia and other migrants deserve due process. They deserve to fight their case in court if the Trump administration tries to deport them to a different country.
Yeah, really important updates there. Willie, James, Inman, thanks so much. Enjoy your weekend.
You bet.
All right, let's take a live look now at the Vatican. It's just past 4:11 in the afternoon. There you've had thousands of people who continue to wait hours and stand there in line to get into the St. Peter's Basilica to pay final respects to Pope Francis, who's now lying in state for one final day. You've got heads of state and royalty from around Europe and around the world set to gather in Rome for the funeral tomorrow. And among them, you've got President Trump, who's on his way now, the UK's Prince William, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. For more on this, let's bring in John Allen. He's the editor of Crux. You should know him well by now. Crux is an outlet that covers the Vatican and the Catholic Church. John, great to see you. What more are we learning about not just who will be at Pope Francis's funeral, but what the seating arrangement will be and what that says about the very specific rules that are in place?
Hi there, Errol. Well, we know that about 130 delegations from countries around the world are going to be represented here. We know that pride of place, so the first two positions in this sort of galaxy of potentates, will be given to Italy, that's the Pope's adopted country, and Argentina, the Pope's native country. So President Javier Milei from Argentina and President Sergio Mattarella, Prime Minister Giorgio Meloni from here in Italy. Then we will have about 10 kings, queens, and princes who will make up the next rows of seats. And then the other heads of state and heads of government will be seated in alphabetical order based upon the name of their country in French. So President Trump will be somewhere among the first third there. But, you know, an interesting footnote, Errol, this is one of the very few times ever that you will see the President of the United States at a public event in which he is not seated in the front row. Some might argue that's a useful dose of humility, Errol.
That's Pope Francis's thing, but a bit jarring, I would say, for a current U.S. president who is not necessarily known for that trait. Walk us through what we know about how events will unfold tomorrow, too, because the ceremony, an element of pomp and circumstance will also be a part of it.
Sure. So this is the funeral mass for Pope Francis. So in many ways, it is an ordinary Catholic mass, simply with a much larger congregation. We're expecting hundreds of thousands at a minimum to be gathered in St. Peter's Square and the surrounding area for this final farewell to Pope Francis tomorrow. So the Mass will be celebrated, and at the end, there will be the final commendation of the Pope's body, which is a ritual in which his remains will be blessed with holy water. Then he will be given a sort of final salute to the crowd in St. Peter's Square. Then he will be taken inside St. Peter's Basilica. Now, What is unique in this instance, because of the specific instructions and wishes that Pope Francis left behind, is that once this Mass wraps up, then the body will be taken through the Basilica to a waiting car, where it will begin a journey across the city of Rome to end up in the Basilica of St. Mary Major, which contains a very famous icon of the Virgin Mary to whom Pope Francis was especially devoted. It will be placed in a special tomb that has been prepared for the late Pope, bearing only the word Franciscus, his name. A footnote there, Errol, the stone for that tomb actually comes from a region of northern Italy where his great-great-grandfather immigrated to Argentina from more than a century ago.
Remarkable. John, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you this week on what's a pivotal moment for the church and really for Europe and the world. Thank you so much. And we'll, of course, stay close in the hours and the days ahead. And for our viewers, we've got full coverage of the Pope's funeral tomorrow morning. It begins with Nora O'Donnell's historic interview with the Holy Father from last year. Pope Francis I will stream at 3 a.m. Eastern, and that will be followed by live coverage of Pope Francis's funeral. The CBS News special report begins at 3:45 a.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7 and on Paramount+. All right, still ahead for you. Former Congressman George Santos, remember him? He's now facing sentencing on fraud and identity theft charges this hour. What he told CBS News ahead of today's hearing. You're in the right place, streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back, everyone. Take a look at this. It's fresh new video of the wildfire still burning in New Jersey right now. There's a 19-year-old accused of starting this blaze, and he is due in court next week, facing arson charges. Police allege the teen started a bonfire and simply left before it was extinguished. The flames have burned thousands of acres so far and is only approximately 50% contained right now. Really remarkable stuff. All right, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Souza with a look at the national forecast this Friday. Tammy, these Jersey fires are really hurting the air quality in the Northeast. What else is going on?
It is hurting the air quality. Let's talk about this fire here in Jersey, because there are some interesting things that people may not know about the fire. First of all, over 15,000 acres has burned, all right? That's almost 24 square miles. Put that back in your head. If you drive 6 miles and then turn and go another 4 miles, that is a large area. 1 square mile has 640 acres in it, and this fire is larger than the Eaton fire that happened in Los Angeles in the fall. Remember the two, the Palisades and the Eaton fire? This is already larger than that Eaton fire. This is where the smoke is going to continue to move off to the north across New York State and up into New England. So the air quality should improve across much of the area. We did have pretty sunsets last night. We did have that bad air quality. The orange is very unhealthy. The yellow, moderate. Today, things are improving. And by tomorrow, we are going to be looking at a pretty nice air quality. Back over to you.
All right, good to know. And no injuries from that fire either. So we want folks to stay safe. Tammy, we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. All right, check my watch. In just a few minutes from now, this man, former Congressman George Santos, will face sentencing in his federal fraud case. Now, his lawyers have asked for the mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years, while prosecutors are pushing for 7. CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now to talk about this. You followed Santos all the way through his career, brief as it may have been. What did Santos say ahead of his sentencing?
Yeah, he told our CBS News colleague Michael Kaplan that he seems to be resigned to his fate here, that he is likely to face several years in prison when this sentencing wraps in central Islip, New York. There's a mandatory minimum in his case. He pleaded guilty to an identity theft charge and a fraud charge, which means there's a minimum of 2 years prison coming to George Santos today. The question is, how much higher will the judge go? The Department of Justice is requesting 7+ years. To do the math, it's 87 months. And one of the arguments they're making is, despite Santos's tearful guilty plea in August, his acknowledgement of his crimes and his arguments of remorse, he has been on a tirade on social media in the past few days, just blasting the Department of Justice, seemingly walking back his statements of acceptance of responsibility and not demonstrating remorse. The Department of Justice has made the argument, Errol, that he is a habitual liar, a con man, and somebody likely to re-offend based on his current tone. Those are arguments they'll make to the federal judge. And Errol, I've been to many federal prison sentencing hearings. When you don't convince the judge you're remorseful, when you don't convince the judge you're accepting responsibility, that's when the judges tend to go higher with the prison sentences.
Yeah, okay, not wise, it would seem. Now, Scott, as we follow information coming into our newsroom at every minute, I know that there's some news that just broke about a judge who has been arrested. This has just happened, so what can you share with us?
Yeah, Errol, this is a different kind of case. The FBI director on social media has announced the arrest of a local judge in Milwaukee. Her name is Hannah Duggan, elected about 8 or 9 years ago in Wisconsin. The FBI is alleging that she helped reroute somebody who was in her court who the feds were trying to detain on an immigration issue. So the FBI director, Kash Patel, says he's arrested the judge with the prospect of a charge of obstruction of law enforcement. We'll wait for a charging document to be filed in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. We'll see when that happens today. Judge Duggan may have expected this because it had been reported over the past few days she was under investigation in this incident. She's had no platform or opportunity to explain what happened in those sequence of events alleged by the FBI director, but we suspect that'll come out quite quickly in any criminal case.
Wow, a headline we do not often see, a judge being arrested. Scott McFarlane with the latest from our D.C. bureau. Scott, thank you. All right, now to some other big cases. Today, the jury in Karen Read's murder trial is visiting the home just south of Boston where Read's boyfriend's body was said to be found in the snow. Now, there has been no shortage of dramatic moments during the first week of testimony in what is Read's second trial. CBS News Boston reporter Peggy Commit brings us up to speed.
We are rounding out the first week of Karen Read's second trial here in Dedham, and it's already shaping up to be quite different than the first. This week, we heard from the victim, John O'Keefe's mom, Peggy O'Keefe. She was understandably very emotional on the stand. She did not testify during the first trial. And then probably the biggest difference we've seen so far is Karen Read's own words being used against her. The prosecution has been playing clips of media interviews that Karen Read has given over the past 2 years. And in most of them, she talks about how much she was drinking the night that John O'Keefe died. And she even suggests that at first she did think, what if I clipped him? What if I accidentally hit him? So those have been playing in court for the jurors to see. Something that's similar is that the prosecution is still trying to paint that picture of a failing relationship between the two of them. And today is going to be a big day. We're going to round out the week with the jury actually visiting the scene of the crime. They're going to see the house, the lawn where John O'Keefe's body was found. They're also going to see Karen Read's car for themselves. Back to you.
All right, Penny, thank you for that. Still ahead for you, Luigi Mangione is set to be arraigned today in a federal court for the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. We'll share what we know before court begins in just a few hours. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back, everyone, to CBS News 24/7 on this Friday. These are the big stories we're tracking. The Trump administration conceded it arrested Mahmoud Khalil without a warrant. Now Khalil's lawyers say his deportation case should be dropped. The Department of Homeland Security is defending the arrest, arguing agents believed Khalil would escape before they could obtain a warrant. His lawyers deny that. And you'll remember, ICE agents took him into custody last month for his role in pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University last year. He's not been charged with any crime. The judge in the University of Idaho murder case has ruled Bryan Kohberger can be sentenced to death if he's convicted. Now, Kohberger's lawyers asked the judge to take the death penalty off the table, citing the defendant's recent autism diagnosis. Prosecutors argued that diagnosis was of mild autism and didn't prove intellectual impairment. Yesterday, the judge agreed with prosecutors. Kohberger is accused of stabbing 4 students to death in 2022 and has pleaded not guilty. The trial is set set to begin in August. And over in Texas, the state Senate passed a $1 billion private school voucher program by which parents can use taxpayer dollars for approved private schools. Democrats criticized the bill, arguing it favors wealthier students and strips public schools of critical funding. Republicans say the bill prioritizes low-income students and those with disabilities. The bill now heads to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. Once signed, the program could launch in the upcoming school year. And today we saw what President Trump called a key diplomatic moment in peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. As this moment unfolds, his envoy, Steve Witkoff, meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, beaming with a smile. Joining us now to discuss what's really happening is Nina Khrushcheva. She's the great-granddaughter of former Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev and a current professor in the Julian J. Studley Graduate Programs of International Affairs at the New School. Nina, good morning to you. What,
good morning,
if anything, do you expect to come out of this meeting?
Well, I actually do not expect much. However, I expect that conversations will continue. As Donald Trump said, ask me in 2 weeks. So I think that they will be continuing trying to somehow get on the same level of all these different proposals for potential ceasefire and potential peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. From what I'm seeing now with all these different proposals kind of floating around, I don't see how they continue to coincide, because it doesn't seem that European and Ukrainian proposal in any way is interesting to Putin. What speaks to potential agreement is that Putin would want to have relationship with Trump and probably wouldn't want to not only anger Trump, but at least just make Trump not interested in having more conversations about it. So I expect that more conversation would happen. And before there was a CBS interview with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, Russian foreign minister, who kind of very conciliatory said that we are ready to sign everything. They're just more details. And I think these are the details that we'll be seeing more and more coming up.
Yeah, Nina, that was with our Face the Nation moderator, Margaret Brennan. Let's just quickly play a clip of that conversation.
Well, the President of the United States believes, and I think rightly so, that we are moving in the right direction. The statement by the President mentions a deal, and we are ready to reach a deal, but there are still some specific points, elements of this deal which need to be fine-tuned.
So as you noted, that's encouraging, but we've been challenged in finding daylight between the Russian position and the American position, although with the U.S., or I should say with the Russian strikes on Kyiv, President Trump did publish in a Truth Social post, Vladimir, stop, which seems to be a very public way of showing disagreement about those strikes. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it is a public disagreement. He was speaking to Putin directly, saying that we're so close to have a deal. Why are you doing what you're doing? To which the Russians, not President himself, President Putin himself, but the Russians responded that the Easter ceasefire is over and we continue with a special military operation, the way they call the war. We continue with it until something is resolved. So for the Russians, is we continue until something is going to be offered that we agree and stop this war. So, and that's why I think the fine-tuned elements are important, because Putin wants to continue conversation with Trump, but it doesn't seem that the Russians, and as I said, I mean, there's between the American proposal and the Russian proposal, there's not so much daylight, but between European and Ukrainian proposal and American and Russian proposal, which in itself sounds insane that suddenly Russia and you and America are on the very same side. Then there is a daylight, and that probably is going to be all these fine-tuned details that will take some time, if ever they can be coincided.
Yeah. This is where we are. Nina Khrushcheva, great to have you speak with us on this really important topic. Thanks for joining us. And a programming note, you can watch Margaret Brennan's interview with Sergei Lavrov on Face the Nation. That show streams Sunday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on CBS News 24/7. All right, at this moment, we are just hours away from Luigi Mangioni's arraignment on federal charges for allegedly murdering the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. And prosecutors have now formally announced they will seek the death penalty in this case. We've got Anna Schechter joining us now. She's the CBS News Senior Coordinating Producer for Crime and Public Safety Unit. Anna, great to see you.
Good to be with you.
I know you've got the documents in your hand, so help us understand the significance of this arraignment and the case the government is making of why the death penalty they think is appropriate.
It's a great question, and it is a big day today. Yeah. We have been hearing about Luigi Mangioni, but not until today is he being arraigned on these 4 federal charges. One of them carries the death penalty. Attorney General Pam Bondi has been outspoken and talked about how President Trump wants her to push for the death penalty in all of these cases, like these murder cases. But what I have in my hand here is a detailed list of reasons why prosecutors, why the government is seeking it. And it's interesting because they go beyond just the premeditation and the murder, but they actually talk about victim impact. So causing injury, harm, and loss to the family, friends, and coworkers of Brian Thompson. Second on the list in this category is the selection of the site and victim for an act of violence. So they talk about the ideological message and they lean into that. So they're kind of leaning into the theater of this. This has garnered so much attention from around the world. So they're reminding people, including the judge, about how he maximized the visibility and impact of the victim's murder. And last, they speak to future dangerousness. So they allege that Mangioni presents a future danger because he expressed intent to target an entire industry and rally political and social opposition to that industry. So they're really not above the theater either. Now, look at Mangioni's lawyers. In every hearing up until now, they've also leaned into the support, the outpouring of support for Mangioni, because remember, the killing of Brian Thompson was a cultural touch point that sparked rage from around the country and around the world over how expensive it is to get health care in the United States. So his lawyers are leaning into that. They've created a website. They're even posting, you can click on a tab. How do I know that my letter to Luigi Mangioni has been received, that he's read what I sent him? Wow. They're actually posting notes. He's apparently keeping tabs on who has written to him and responding. So his lawyers are leaning into the public attention, but the prosecutors are as well. And regardless of what you think about the death penalty, they feel that in this case, it's warranted. And remember, sometimes this might be surprising to some of our viewers, but 54% of Americans today support the death penalty. Now, that's right, lower than has been in the past, but it's still more than half of Americans believe it's warranted in some cases.
And it is a reminder that you have Brian Thompson's widow, his children living through trauma after the death of their father and husband. What about the state charges that Mangioni is facing in Pennsylvania as well? How is that different?
Well, this is different because all of that happened in the past. So Mangioni was arraigned on 11 counts in New York. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg brought those murder charges, gun charges, forgery charges, and that's related to that fake ID that he used. So he was already arraigned and pleaded not guilty back in December to those charges. And then also, let's not forget the Pennsylvania charges. He was charged with weapons possession and forgery of documents in Pennsylvania. Those cases are moving forward, but my sources tell me that given the new Trump administration that came into office in late January, they believe that the federal case will likely go first, that federal prosecutors will likely tell those state prosecutors, hold off, we want to go first. Very serious stuff, and you're reading through all the documents for us. Anna Schechter, thanks so much. Great to see you this Friday. All right, coming up next for you all, we will hear from the author of Conclave. It's what the film was based on. The book is gaining popularity in the wake of the pop's death, and we'll help you understand what was fact and what was fiction. You're in the right place, streaming CBS News 24/7.
Welcome back. Senior cardinals in the Catholic Church are set to gather in the coming weeks for the all-important Conclave to elect a successor to the late Pope Francis. Now, last year's hit movie entitled Conclave was based on this, the best-selling novel by Robert Harris, the author. It sparked fresh interest into the secretive process of how a new pontiff is chosen, which we don't always get to see. Earlier, I spoke with Robert Harris on the CBS Morning News about what inspired him to write this book.
Well, I got some help from the Vatican, actually. I asked to see certain locations. The Casa Santa Marta, as it's called, the hostel where the cardinal electors stay. All their phones and their laptops are taken off them, and they go into a room. The shutters are sealed, so they're completely sequestered. I saw that, and there, to everyone's surprise, Pope Francis decided to stay after he was elected. The Pope is entitled to very grand apartments in a palace, but he turned that down. So I saw that, saw his bedroom indeed. I saw the Sistine Chapel, obviously, the Pauline Chapel where they go to pray, the Vatican Gardens, all those sorts of things. So I got the basics of what the scenes where I would set everything. And then I hit on the idea of telling it all through the fictional dean of the College of Cardinals, who is responsible for the whole thing. And that's brilliantly played by Ray Fiennes in the film. And I think it was that made the whole thing work, because it pulled it all together. And I did a lot of research, and so you get the whole story of what a conclave is like and past conclaves and the difficulties that arise. It's a very political process and a really gripping story, even if you are not actually a Catholic. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, it truly is, and it was wonderful to chat with him this morning. You can see the full interview on our CBS News YouTube page. Now, as the first Latin American leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis really was an inspiration to followers in his home country of Argentina and in Latino communities around the world. CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez brings us more on that from Miami.
Good morning to you. You know, it wasn't just that he was from Argentina and loved soccer. For many, they say it really did give them a sense of pride to know that a Latin American was leading the church and a voice when it came to issues like immigration. It wasn't the first time parishioners at St. Martha's Church in Miami had mourned the passing of a pope. It was the first time they mourned one who came from the same continent they did. Like Francisca Benton, who's originally from Colombia. So it was a shock, because you had just seen him for Easter.
Yes.
Totalmente, a huge shock for you. Y tristeza, you said sadness. And Claudia Rishkov. Was it significant for you that he was a Latin American?
Of course, absolutely. I'm originally from Honduras. To represent the Latin America at the Vatican, at the global, is so amazing.
Back in Pope Francis's hometown in Argentina, reflection replaced the celebrations of 2013, when he rose from Archbishop of Buenos Aires to the church's first Latin American pope. For some, it was overdue. 40% of the world's Catholics live in Latin America, and now there is mourning from Mexico City to Rio de Janeiro. Pope Francis traveled to 10 Latin American countries, including a historic 5-day trip to Mexico in 2016, where he visited the poor and prisoners. ¿Te ha cambiado? Has it changed you?
Sí.
In Juarez, we spoke with Eva La Quintana, a woman who was convicted of money laundering linked to organized crime, but whose redemption story led her to be chosen to address the Pope in person. Not everyone here is evil, she told us. There are those of us who truly seek redemption.
Pues es un milagro.
It's a miracle.
Sí.
It's an impact that extends beyond Latin America. It is estimated that more than a third of Catholics here in the U.S. are of Hispanic descent.
All right, Manny, thank you for that. Still to come for you, we're going to take you here. One last look at your weekend forecast. Get your plans ready. Might you need an umbrella? You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, get this. Quarterback Cam Ward was the first player to hear his name called in the first round of the NFL draft last night. He will begin his career with the Tennessee Titans. And you're also looking at the list. The Jacksonville Jaguars then shocked fans by making a trade to move up the draft to select Colorado's Travis Hunter. The Raiders took top running back Ashton Jeanty, 6th overall. He was the runner-up for the Heisman Trophy last season, you might remember. Rounds 2 and 3 take place tonight. The final rounds will be held tomorrow. Now, the devastating wildfires in California have sparked a surge in interest, for obvious reasons, in disaster-proof homes. CBS News Los Angeles reporter Joy Benedict takes us inside this movement to build living spaces that can withstand wildfires, floods, and even earthquakes.
It was one of the worst disasters in American history. But as victims of the recent wildfires look to rebuild,
we're going to do this in Altadena because our house burned down. Okay.
A few are hoping to do it differently.
I take this climate crisis thing seriously. I mean, it's not going to get any better.
Ellen Stortland watched her home burn on television after evacuating from Altadena during the Eaton fire. Now she's planning to build again using the dirt on her property, constructing a super adobe home.
Make sure you get to know your land a little bit before you dive right in.
She came to this open house by CalEarth to learn more about the process.
These are earthquake, flood, and fireproof.
CalEarth is a nonprofit founded by Nader Khalili, an Iranian architect who developed a modern adobe home using earth architecture.
He took the old tradition of adobe that he came from in his home in Iran and modernized it using sandbag and barbed wire.
Bridget Butler is the executive director of the CalEarth Institute. She says every open house has been sold out since the fires.
You can see right here in this little window nook how thick the walls are.
This 3-bedroom, 2-bath super adobe is what most come to see. It looks like any home, but each room is a series of coiled walls made into circles or ovals. And although there are many things that folks find appealing about these adobe homes, one of its biggest strengths is actually in its shape. These dome-shaped rooms are one of the things that help protect it from the environment.
The arch shape is the strongest shape in nature,
making it unshakable and harder to wash away or burn.
Instead of working against nature or trying to beat nature at its own game, it works in harmony with nature.
Which is exactly what Snortland wants.
We are going to have to deal with extreme weather for the rest of our lives. To pretend otherwise is really folly.
She and her husband have now lost a home to fire, one to floods, and another to a mudslide. So they are tired of fighting the storm.
I don't see anybody doing anything radical. So what I can do is make my home radical.
Using the oldest tool literally on Earth to try and weather the environment's ever-changing tide of destruction. Joy Benedict, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Wow, what a concept. All right, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Souza with a last look at our national forecast. Tammy, how do things look?
Well, you know what? We're going to have a little bit of a busy weekend in some places, but busy can be good. First off, let's start with the temperatures, because for today, we're going to be quite warm out there in some places. We head into the south. You can see the 80s, even the 90s, all across the south into Florida. No surprise there. Up the East Coast, we're looking at the 70s and the 80s. A little bit cooler across the Great Lakes, and that's because we have a storm system that is coming in. So let's go ahead and take a look at this storm system that is making its way in our area. This is going to bring relief from the wildfires. Look at it headed toward the East Coast. Tonight and throughout the day tomorrow, showers and thunderstorms. We also have a batch of thunderstorms across Texas and on the West Coast. We're looking at a much-needed rain in the LA basin. It's going to bring some heavy snow once you get up into the upper elevations of the Sierra Nevada. So let's go ahead and talk about what is going to happen as far as the severe weather probabilities, mainly in Texas today. If you're in Lubbock, you are in the center of where all of this is, and that's something that you're going to have to keep a close eye on. As far as tornadoes, the tornado threat is going to be right here, a bullseye over Lubbock, Texas. Back over to you.
Got to be careful there. But what is it? April showers bring May flowers. So come on, folks. Welcome it. Tammy, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. And that does it for me, but stay right where you are. After the break, Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all your breaking news from coast to coast. Have a great weekend. This is CBS News 24/7.